June 1944. The bloodiest and most massive theater of World War II shifts to the Karelian Isthmus. In this extraordinary feature documentary, we examine the Battle of Tali-Ihantala, the largest clash in Nordic history, from two completely opposing perspectives. First, we experience the desperate steel wall of the defenders, followed by a deep look inside the Red Army's assault machine. This was the battle for Finland's very existence. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, thousands of artillery pieces, and hundreds of tanks clashed in an inferno that shook the earth for weeks. How could the small Finnish army halt Stalin's invincible giant? Sit back and immerse yourself in this second-by-second epic war documentary. We begin on the Finnish defensive lines in June 1944. On June 9, 1944, the long trench warfare era ended in hell. The Soviet Union launched a massive offensive on the Karelian Isthmus, the likes of which had never been seen in the Nordic countries. Thousands of artillery pieces and rocket launchers pounded the Finnish front line at Valkeasaari. The barrage was so intense that trenches collapsed and eardrums ruptured from air pressure. Following the artillery barrage, hundreds of Soviet T-34 and heavy KV tanks surged into the Finnish positions. Supported by massed infantry, the Finnish frontline troops were in shock and forced to retreat before the overwhelming numbers. Germany's newly supplied anti-tank weapons, Panzerfausts and Panzerschrecks, were still in storage, leaving few counters to the steel monsters. The darkest hour occurred on June 20th, when the Pearl of Karelia, the city of Viipuri, was lost to Soviet forces almost without a fight in just a few hours. The rapid collapse of Viipuri was a massive moral blow to the entire Finnish military and the home front. Many feared that the nation's independence was permanently lost and the Red Army would march straight to Helsinki. Commander-in-Chief Mannerheim and headquarters reacted swiftly to the crisis. Scattered regiments were gathered during the retreat, and fresh elite divisions were transferred to the front directly from East Karelia. The troops were deployed on the new, final defensive line, the VKT-line, Viipuri-Saari-Taipale. Behind this line, in the Tali sector, a steel wall was forged. On June 21st, the Finns launched intense delaying and counterattacking operations in the Tali area. The Panzer Brigade, led by Major General Ruben Lagus, along with the newly arrived cavalry division, struck directly into the flank of the advancing Red Army spearheads. The fighting turned into chaotic wilderness warfare, with tanks clashing in the dense forests. To aid Finland, an elite unit of the German Air Force, Flight Detachment, Kuhlmey, led by Lieutenant Colonel Kurt Kuhlmey, arrived. Based in Amola, German Stuka dive bombers and Focke-Wulf fighters immediately initiated massive bombing raids. They struck with medical precision against Red Army armor columns, ammo dumps, and artillery, providing vital air support. In addition to air support, Germany deployed the Assault Gun Battalion, 303 Sturmjaschütze, Abteilung, sending 8 ground forces. These German Stu-G3 assault guns deployed alongside Finnish infantrymen on the front line. Their low profile and powerful 75mm gun made them perfect weapons for destroying heavy Soviet T-34 and KV tanks in the Finnish woods. At the same time, Finnish soldiers were finally distributed large numbers of new German close-range anti-tank weapons, Panzerfausts and Panzerschrecks. These weapons demanded cold-blooded courage, as an enemy tank had to be allowed within dozens or just a few meters before firing. This instantly altered infantry power dynamics. In the area of Tali village and ridge, Infantry Regiment 12, known as the Swamp Regiment, faced massive pressure from the Red Army. These men, who had originally fought in Lapland, were unfazed by the armored onslaught. Utilizing new anti-tank weapons, the Finns destroyed dozens of Soviet tanks directly in front of their trenches, halting the breakthrough. By June 24th, the Tali area had transformed into a literal meat grinder. Artillery fire from both sides was continuous, and forests blazed in a sea of fire. Finnish troops were utterly exhausted, but the lines held honorably with Allied support. The Red Army command realized a direct breakthrough at Tali was turning too costly and shifted focus. In late June, the Finns withdrew a few kilometers north to the village of Ihantala. Here, the final, unbreakable defensive line was formed. The Red Army brought fresh armored divisions to the sector, launching a massive assault to sweep the Finns aside. The narrow roads and open fields of Ihantala turned into an inferno in seconds. Finland's secret weapon was the world's most advanced artillery fire control system, developed by General Nenonen. Thanks to a new correction plotter, the Finns could concentrate the fire of over 20 artillery battalions, up to 250 guns on a single target within minutes. This made Finnish artillery a lethally precise and devastating machine. As Red Army tanks and infantry formed up for the assault on the open plains of Ihantala, Finnish forward observers gave the command. In seconds, the sky tore open, and thousands of artillery shells detonated precisely on the enemy assembly areas. The ground shook for miles, and the rain of steel shredded tanks, trucks, and men alike, simultaneously, while the artillery hammered the ground. The Stukas and Focke-Wulfs of German detachment, Kuhlmey, dove from the clouds straight into the enemy's rear. They dropped tons of bombs on Soviet supply lines, bridges, and ammo dumps. The flawless cooperation between air power and ground artillery created an impassable wall of fire. By July 9th, the Red Army's offensive power was completely spent against the rocks and fields of Ihantala. Having lost hundreds of tanks and tens of thousands of men, the Soviet command realized that breaking Finland had become impossible. Joseph Stalin ordered the offensive on the isthmus to halt. The miracle of Ihantala had saved Finland's independence. We have seen the hell of Tali-Ihantala through the eyes of the defenders and their German allies. But how did this largest combined arms clash in Nordic history look from the side of the attacking Red Army? How did Soviet soldiers and tank commanders experience the Finnish steel wall? Next, we turn the pages of history to the Red Army lines. On the Soviet side, the operation was commanded by the leader of the Leningrad Front, Colonel General Leonid Kuhlmey. Joseph Stalin had issued a clear and ruthless order: crush the Finnish defense to force the nation out of the war. The Soviet objective was to advance rapidly to Viipuri, and then deep into the Finnish heartland, eliminating the northern threat. Guverov was provided with a record-breaking military machine. 2 entire army corps were concentrated on the Karelian Isthmus, including over 260,000 soldiers, 7,500 artillery pieces and mortars, and hundreds of combat aircraft. No military in the Nordic countries had ever faced such industrial and mechanical force, perfected in years of fighting against Germany. Modern T-34 tanks and giant, heavily armored KV and I-series tanks served as the spearhead of the Soviet assault. Soviet tank commanders felt invincible as they drove forward through the Finnish positions. Their strategy relied on pure mass. Once the artillery turned the ground to dust, the armor surged through the fractures. On June 9th and 10th, Soviet artillerymen and infantry experienced absolute success at Valkeasaari. Their opening barrage, the largest in regional history, swept away Finnish defensive positions in seconds. Advancing Soviet soldiers watched the Finns retreat in panic. This initial success boosted the Red Army's morale to its peak. The Red Army's triumph reached its peak on June 20th, as they reached Viipuri. The city was captured almost without resistance in just a few hours as the Finns retreated in confusion. Soviet soldiers marched to the ruins of the historic castle and raised the red flag. In the headquarters, it was believed the war was practically won. Following the victory at Viipuri, Soviet commands to the frontline troops were clear: continue the assault immediately toward the northwest, and just tank and infantry regiments marched along narrow roads full of confidence. None of the Soviet commanders yet suspected that the looming Tali bottleneck would turn into a death trap. Following the easy victory in Viipuri, the Red Army spearheads suddenly hit a brick wall. At the Tali bottleneck, the terrain became difficult. Lakes, swamps, and steep cliffs forced Soviet armor columns onto a few narrow roads. The Finns had regrouped into a firm defense, and the confident Soviet tanks immediately faced heavy fire. Soviet infantrymen and tankers encountered a new, terrifying danger. Finnish soldiers no longer fled from the armored onslaught, but waited cold-bloodedly in their trenches. They struck with German Panzerschrecks and Panzerfausts directly into the thin flanks of T-34 tanks from just meters away. Wrecked, burning tanks began blocking the advance routes. The advancing Red Army regiments experienced the absolute fury of the German detachment, Kuhlmey. Diving Stuka bombers and Focke-Wulf fighters sowed death upon the Soviet supply columns and artillery positions. The airstrikes were so violent and continuous that entire assault preparations turned into chaos before they could even begin. Soviet commanders were also troubled by the appearance of the German army's own assault guns. The Stu-GII. These low and well-camouflaged steel monsters stalked from the concealment of the Finnish woods. They picked off Soviet tanks from long ranges before the Red Army crews could even detect from which direction death approached. By June 24th, the mood in the Leningrad Front headquarters turned grave. The Tali sector had become a terrifying meat grinder for the Red Army, consuming men and equipment at a record pace. Although Soviet troops pushed forward in continuous waves, the Finnish lines bent but did not break. Guverov had to admit the direct breakthrough was failing. Following the exhausting battles at Tali, the Soviet command shifted the focus of the assault a few kilometers north toward the village of Ihantala. Guverov marched fresh elite divisions and massive amounts of artillery to the sector. The order was absolute: break the new Finnish line at all costs to open the road into the heartland before summer's end. In early July, Red Army tanks, trucks, and thousands of infantrymen assembled for the grand final assault on the open fields and roadsides of Ihantala. Soviet soldiers prepared to charge, still relying on their massive numbers. However, they did not know that Finnish forward observers atop the high hills were tracking their every move with binoculars. Suddenly, a literal hell tore open over the Soviet troops. Finnish artillery unleashed a concentrated barrage the likes of which the attackers had never experienced. In a single second, hundreds of shells began raining precisely onto the assembly zones. The air pressure tossed trucks, and shrapnel shredded everything. The air turned thick with smoke and death. The Finnish artillery fire was so synchronized and accurate that entire Soviet regiments and tank companies were destroyed within minutes before they could even begin their advance. The steel wreckage of T-34 tanks and burning vehicles blocked the ditches and roads. The cries of the wounded were drowned out by the continuous roar. On July 9, 1944, the Red Army Command had to report the grim realities to Moscow. The offensive on the Isthmus had hit a brick wall, and casualties had become unsustainable. At the same time, the race to Berlin demanded fresh troops on the German front. Joseph Stalin issued the order to halt all attacks against Finland and dug in. This was the monumental story of Tali-Ihantala, experienced from the ranks of both the defenders and the attackers. The largest battle in Nordic history claimed tens of thousands of casualties, but it saved Finland's independence. Thank you for watching documentary. Like the video, subscribe, and honor the legacy of our veterans.